I am so glad to see you, Jonathan.
You aren't being sarcastic, are you?
No, that's just my voice. I am genuinely so very glad that you are back.
What? Did you not enjoy running the show last week?
Please never leave us again.
I will take that as a yes.
Seriously, though, I fear I've been less than appreciative of all that you do here, so truly, thank you.
Why, Bruce, I don't know what to say, but perhaps I will think of something after recording today's episode, which I must now attend to.
A seamless transition as always, Jonathan.
Should we not tell him about Scarlett?
Who? Oh, right, her. Shame we never had that meeting.
Yes, she just left on that phone call before Mr. McNally could return, and no one has seen or heard from her since. Suspicious, if you ask me.
A bit expository, Archie, but you make a fair point that it's somewhat strange. Maybe we have seen the last of her and our show can go on as normal.
Optimism doesn't suit you, Bruce.
You're right, I'm just waiting for the other stiletto to drop.
All right, Denberg. No intro again this week. That's fine, I suppose. Well, dear listeners, my name is Jonathan T. McNally, and you are listening to yesterday's news today. There is so very much to cover this week. We begin with the ruling of a Kentucky grand jury in the case against the Louisville police officers who killed Breonna Taylor during a botched raid. We have discussed this tragic event on this show in the past, often in conjunction with the death of George Floyd, which sparked massive Black Lives Matter protests throughout the country. On Wednesday, it was announced by Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron that only one officer involved, Brett Hankison, would face 3 charges of wanton endangerment in connection to the shooting. These charges face a sentence of 1 to 5 years in prison for each count. According to the Attorney General, Hankison was not charged with homicide because it was not possible to verify that his bullets were the ones which hit Breonna Taylor. Cameron would go on to say that the officers were justified in the discharge of their weapons, as they were being fired upon by Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, who was responding to unknown persons breaking and entering into their home. Ridley Balco of The Washington Post addressed what he called a, quote, frenzy of misinformation on social media surrounding the case, in an article which gathered information from several sources, including the New York Times, the Louisville Courier-Journal, and lawyers for Breonna Taylor's family. He details the events of the night in question as a raid served on a no-knock warrant which was seemingly copied and pasted from other such warrants connected to Taylor's ex-boyfriend Jamarcus Glover. No-knock raids are typically reserved for those who pose an imminent threat to the public or who are liable to destroy evidence when police show up. The copied text indicated such a situation. As the Supreme Court ruled previously, sufficient evidence of these dangers must be presented to the judge who approves such a warrant, of which none was presented in the case of Breonna Taylor. In summation, through a series of legal errors and loopholes, it would appear that the only justice Breonna Taylor will receive from this tragedy will come from the court of public opinion, a court which came into session instantaneously, as protests erupted nationwide immediately following the decision. 127 protesters were arrested in Louisville after the announcement, with more protests happening in cities across the country. 2 police officers were shot and wounded during the Louisville protests, with no word as to the motive of the arrested suspect. Meanwhile, the president has initiated a series of executive orders over the past 2 weeks. This began with an announcement on September 17th. He would be combating school curriculums that address systemic racism in America. He said such education was a twisted web of lies and child abuse. This was largely aimed at the 1619 Project, which was developed by the New York Times in 2019 to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the national narrative. The president called the project toxic propaganda, an ideological poison, countering it with his 1776 commission, whose stated purpose is to promote patriotic education and create a grant to develop pro-American curriculum. Some on social media have likened this rhetoric to certain indoctrination programs in 1920s Germany, but political analysts are calling this largely a political move, as the federal government does not have jurisdiction over school curriculum. The president continued a similar sentiment with an executive order on the 22nd that expanded a ban on racial sensitivity training to federal workers and contractors. He admonished, quote, instructors and materials teaching that men and members of certain races are inherently sexist and racist, end quote. Mr. Trump also announced the Born Alive executive order that will ensure all babies born alive receive medical care, even if born prematurely or after surviving abortion. Opponents fear this will spread misinformation, as such instances are very rare, and healthcare providers are already legally obligated to provide appropriate medical care. The president said this is our sacrosanct moral duty in his video message Wednesday to the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. And finally, on Thursday, he announced his America First healthcare plan, which read as a policy lacking specifics for how some things would be accomplished, most of course needing Congress to move forward. Key among these was the oft-discussed lowering of prescription drug costs and the banning of surprise medical bills. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar said Mr. Trump's vision includes finding alternative measures of curtailing drug costs if Congress doesn't pass legislation by 2021. Also, to address this, the president intends to mail $200 discount cards to Medicare beneficiaries to help with drug copays. The last main point addressed in the plan is to guarantee protections for pre-existing conditions. Democrats were quick with the rebuttal that these protections are already covered with the Affordable Care Act, which is at risk due to a Trump-backed lawsuit pending before the Supreme Court. Also this week, the United States surpassed 200,000 deaths resulting from the coronavirus pandemic. It is within the top 3 leading causes of death in the U.S. this year. In the wake of these numbers, criticisms have been leveled at the federal government and national health agencies for PPE shortages, inadequate testing, and inconsistent messaging. At a campaign rally in Ohio on Monday, President Trump said, "Coronavirus affects virtually nobody. It's an amazing thing." According to a report by Axios, cases are surging again, with cases rising in 22 states over the past week. On Tuesday night, the House approved a stopgap bill to avoid the looming government shutdown. With the current funding package set to expire in just a few days, this new bill will fund the government through December 11th. This will add nearly $8 billion to continuing food and nutrition assistance programs, as well as funding for farmers and agriculture. In other news, a report by the Congressional Budget Office last Monday sees the federal debt becoming nearly twice the size of the U.S. economy by the year 2050. Also, on Monday, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, that has been working to obtain President Trump's tax returns, suggested in a court filing for the first time that they have grounds to investigate him and his businesses for tax fraud, along with other alleged misconduct such as insurance fraud and falsification of business reports. Lawyers for Mr. Trump have repeatedly defended against subpoenas for the president's tax returns, saying this investigation is wildly overbroad and politically motivated. At the same time, U.S. District Judge Victor Marrero in Manhattan ordered that the U.S. Postal Service expedite all November election mail and approve additional overtime for postal workers. This is a follow-up to our report on highly controversial changes made to the USPS earlier this summer. Many of these reductions in service were enacted by Trump-appointed Postmaster General Louis DeJoy in a year that is expected to have much higher than normal mail-in votes. The Postal Service said it is reviewing the court's decision. And now, an ongoing story about a whistleblower complaint that claimed federal immigration detainees underwent unnecessary gynecological surgeries without consent. These were alleged to have included full hysterectomies. A nurse at an ICE facility, Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia, also says that safety protocols and testing for COVID-19 were ignored. Following the complaint, it was revealed that 42 detainees at the facility had tested positive for the virus. Since these statements have come to light, several investigations have been called for. On Tuesday, the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General confirmed that they will be reviewing the nurse who filed the complaint and reviewing practices and records at the facility. Additionally, Mexican Foreign Secretary Marcelo Ebrard has said his government is also looking into these claims. Investigations will continue as more women come forward saying they felt pressured into procedures, specifying an outside OBGYN, Dr. Mahendra Amin, who vehemently denies these allegations. His lawyers say they are confident that he will be cleared of any wrongdoing. ICE said its records only show 2 female detainees were referred for hysterectomies since 2018. According to U.S. Representative Parila Jayapal, lawyers representing 17 detainees have come forward saying their clients received unnecessary gynecological procedures from Dr. Amin. The issue continues to be widely discussed, with many citing historical accounts of forced sterilizations of imprisoned populations. And as a follow-up to our report of mass incarceration and alleged genocide of Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang province, there are now reports of hundreds of thousands of Tibetan farmers being forced from their land and into military-style labor camps. The analysis by the Jamestown Foundation, a U.S. research institute, reveals Chinese quotas that require Tibetan regional governments to place individuals in training programs and later transfer thousands to other regions for work in low-paid jobs like manufacturing and construction. While considered less coercive than activities in Xinjiang, training programs are still linked to indoctrination, including diluting the negative influence of religion, reforming backward thinking, and training in Chinese language and work ethics. Tibetans are also encouraged to transfer their land to government-run cooperatives. The Chinese government has said these programs are to counter terrorism and alleviate poverty, and that forced labor simply does not exist. And so concludes the bulk of our national and world coverage for the week. Thus, we move on to some
Strangely true local news.
Why, yes. Thank you, Denberg. Our first story is a bit of election news, in a sense. Many may be wondering what the future holds with the much-discussed and impending U.S. presidential election. But shamans in Peru are working to answer that question for us. On Wednesday, an ancestral ritual was performed with incense smoke, flowers, and photos of both candidates. Dressed in multicolored garb, the shamans chanted and blew a traditional Andean shell instrument, invoking the Pachamama, or Mother Earth, for the vote to take place peacefully without attacks or witchcraft between the rivals. Unfortunately, the master shamans and shaman teachers were unable to reach a consensus on who would win. But they did smear medical plants, fruits, and a live snake onto photos of both former Vice President Biden and President Trump in an effort to cleanse them and send them good energies. Positive energies were also to be had as Illinois man Steve Jen celebrated the 60th anniversary of a half-eaten sandwich that he nabbed from Richard Nixon. The date was September 22, 1960. And then Vice President Nixon was visiting his hometown of Sullivan to give a speech. Jen was 14 at the time, and his Boy Scout troop was enlisted to help with Nixon's visit. The man of the hour took a few bites of his buffalo barbecue sandwich, commented how tasty it was, and left it behind when he left the park. Jen said, "If no one else is going to take it, I.M. He has kept it frozen in his personal freezers ever since. The preserved presidential lunch has granted him media attention over the years, including The Tonight Show in 1988. The host at the time, Jimmy Carson, joked that you could probably sell this to some museum. A very pathetic museum. And now, with more sterling star-studded commendations, here is a brief report on the Emmy Awards from our entertainment reporter, Bruce.
Yes, the Emmys happened this week, and some people won some awards.
That was very brief. Bruce, did you not watch the Emmys?
In a manner of speaking, no, not at all. There's just so much more of importance that's happening in our world.
You are our entertainment reporter, Bruce.
I don't like award shows, Jonathan. They don't bring me joy.
Could you at least provide us with some highlights?
Let me see here. It looks like it was a virtual ceremony, all occurring via live feeds with actors streaming from all over the world. Sounds somewhat interesting. At the start, host Jimmy Kimmel said, "Welcome to the Pandemies." Never mind that. Unrelated, for the second year in a row, the awards had an all-time low in TV viewership.
Yes, Bruce. And what of those who won awards?
Well, Schitt's Creek...
Bruce!
I swear, that's the name of it. Comedy series Schitt's Creek won a record-breaking 9 awards. HBO shows were among the biggest winners, with Watchmen taking Outstanding Limited Series and Succession receiving Outstanding Drama Series. Zendaya became the youngest Emmy winner ever for her lead role in the HBO drama Euphoria. Also, John Oliver accepted his 5th Emmy win for the new satire program Last Week Tonight. Why does that name sound so familiar? And pandemic jokes and political messaging were heard throughout the night. Emmy winners Regina King and Mark Ruffalo specifically encouraged viewers to get out and vote. And that's all I've got. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you for that extemporaneous report. That also makes for the perfect transition to our entirely unsponsored ad for the week. Take it away, Denberg.
Oh, 2020. What a year. It is a historic time of pandemics and natural disasters, of civil unrest and activism. This is a time that will be etched into the history books, and the pages of the future are yet to be written. Now is your chance to help shape it, to have your voice heard in such a tumultuous era. All you have to do is vote. But that may be easier said than done. There are a few steps you must complete before you can participate in the U.S. election on Tuesday, November 3rd. First, you need to register to vote. Unfortunately, every state has different voting rules, so the best way is to check with your local election office, either in person, over the phone, or via the World Wide Web. Each state also has different deadlines for when you must register by, but most are coming up quickly. A good portion of registration deadlines occur within the first week of October. Also, it is important to verify that you are in fact registered, and that all of your information is correct and up to date. Next, educate yourself on candidates and the issues. This step is often overlooked in these types of public service announcements, but it is very important to remember that the president isn't the only thing you need to choose. Your everyday life is also very much decided by your representatives, senators, and governors, your sheriffs, district attorneys, and judges. Finally, educate yourself on how you can vote when the time comes. Most places allow citizens to vote by mail, early in person, and of course at your polling place on Election Day. But with safety concerns and stress from current pandemics, choosing which works for you is more important than ever. Also, all methods have different rules which vary by state that you should be sure to check up on before you get in line at the polls. This sounds like a lot of work, but I promise that it is worth it. If you want to be proud to be an American, then lend your voice, your vote to the process, because it counts. It matters. In 2016, 60% of eligible voters did not vote. By following these few steps, you can be a part of the percentage that decides what these United States will be after the year that has been 2020.
Thank you, Denberg. And such decisions are on the minds of many, as the nation reacts to the loss of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If I may take a moment here before we begin this particular story, I feel I should mention my reaction to the passing of this truly remarkable woman. Strangely enough, it occurred while I was recording our previous episode of the show. I received a message from a very close friend while sitting in this very recording booth, and I found in that moment that I could record no more. I simply sat in stunned silence, utterly frozen, trying to process this news. I wanted then to throw away that entire episode and devote a whole new one to her memory. Alas, I was unable, due to the nature of how this show is recorded. But I decided then and there that we would soon cover the life and great impact of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was born Joan Ruth Bader on March 15, 1933, and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Her father, Nathan, was a Jewish immigrant from Ukraine. Her mother, Celia, took an active role in her education, but passed away the day before Ruth's high school graduation. In 1954, Bader received a Bachelor of Arts degree in government at Cornell University in New York, where she also met her future husband, Martin D. Ginsburg. Later she would say of him, "What made Marty so overwhelmingly attractive to me was that he cared that I had a brain." She became the highest-ranking female student of her class and married Ginsburg a month after graduating. At age 21, she was working for the Social Security Administration office in Oklahoma, but was demoted after becoming pregnant with their first child. In the fall of 1956, Ruth Bader Ginsburg became one of only 9 women in a class of 500 enrolled at Harvard Law School. While there, she cared for her husband who had been diagnosed with cancer, raised her new family, and persevered despite discrimination by even the highest authorities at the school. She later transferred to Columbia Law School, where she earned her law degree and tied for first in her class. She also became the first woman to ever be on 2 major law reviews. Early in her legal career, Ginsburg had difficulty finding employment, despite stellar recommendations from professors and judges alike. She also found she would be paid less than her male colleagues when working at Rutgers Law School in 1963. In 1970, she co-founded the Women's Rights Law Reporter, the first journal in the U.S. to focus solely on women's rights. Following this, she became the first tenured woman at Columbia Law School, where she co-authored the first law school casebook on sex discrimination. By 1972, she had co-founded the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU, which participated in 300 gender discrimination cases by 1974, helping women and men alike. Ginsburg herself won 5 of 6 such cases before the Supreme Court between 1973 and 1976. This was all part of a strategic push, wherein she battled against specific gender-related statutes, gradually building toward improving inequality. She was also well known as a brilliant speaker, choosing language very carefully, notably favoring the use of the word gender instead of sex, that she found often distracted judges. With her growing reputation and prominent advocacy, President Jimmy Carter appointed her to be a federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia in 1980. She served there 13 years until her appointment to the Supreme Court by President Bill Clinton in 1993. She was the first Jewish woman and only the second woman to serve on the nation's highest court. There she would advocate for women's rights in much the way she always had, through precise decisions that would address specific discriminatory issues. Early on, she made it very clear that she would back abortion rights, believing the government has no business making that choice for a woman. In 1996, She authored the court's opinion that qualified women should not be denied admission to the Virginia Military Institute. She was involved in many landmark decisions, including those beyond discrimination. She voted with the majority striking down the death penalty for juveniles, and helped roll back some Bush administration policies from the War on Terror. Ginsburg long held the view that change must ultimately come from Congress, but it was the duty of the courts to provide guidance. She provided such guidance following the case of Ledbetter v. Goodyear in 2007, wherein a woman was being paid significantly less than men with the same qualifications. Being outspoken about this issue led to legislation addressing fair pay that was signed by then-President Barack Obama. All this led to renewed notoriety for the Supreme Court Justice. Her status as a feminist icon cemented. She became the subject of a documentary and much media attention. She also received the nickname Notorious RBG, after the famed rap artist with a similar moniker. She was looked up to by many as an empowering figure, standing against and accomplishing so much in the face of systemic adversity. During this time, she was battling cancer, undergoing treatments and surgeries, but quite incredibly missing very few days on the bench. She remained strong, wanting to continue to serve as long as possible, but tragically on September 18th, 2020, she lost this fight. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away in her home in Washington, D.C., surrounded by her family, due to complications from metastatic cancer of the pancreas. She was 87 years old, and she had served on the Supreme Court for more than a quarter century. This woman was a force to be reckoned with, a brilliant orator and legal mind, and an incredible advocate for equality. Even in her final days, she was so focused on the future of this country, telling her daughter, "My most fervent wish is that I will not be replaced until a new president is installed." There's a certain tragedy to the fact that such a woman, who had persevered and fought her whole life to be worried about this. That indeed within moments of her passing, politicians and pundits on both sides were debating what would become of her seat on the court. I do need to tell of the political fallout, about the candidates jockeying for power, of the president's already selected nominee, but that shall have to wait until next week. For now, I say this. Rest in peace, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We should all be thankful for all that she has done, which has improved the lives of so many. This country would not be as far as it is today if she was not who she was. Thank you, and good night.
This program was written and performed by Roger J. Thacher and Dennis Shanaberg. You are encouraged to obtain a subscription to this broadcast with the simple selection of a button below. Furthermore, you can indicate your appreciation by giving us the old thumbs up. Did you have any thoughts about any of our stories? Please comment them below. Or to read those of our newsmen, tune your Twitter to @RadioYNT. And as always, be sure to tune in next week to hear tomorrow's news of yesterday. Then.
I must say I am pleased with how this week's episode turned out.
Why? Because I didn't take over with some overlong political rant?
Maybe somewhat. No. It was just fairly straightforward, simply reporting the news. You know, it kind of reminded me of the good old days,
What do you mean, the good old days? We've only been at this a couple of months. Oh. You mean back home?
Yes, back home. Those were simpler times.
That they were, old friend. That they were.